Varelia Prime was known across the galaxy as a world of perfect order, glowing towers, and whispering hive cities built deep beneath crystal blue skies. The insectoid species called the Zorak lived in harmony, ruled by logic, guided by science, and untouched by war or chaos for over 200 years. But that peace began to shatter when small, strange things started happening in Hive Sector 12. At first, workers simply stopped responding to their neural links. Some wandered away from assigned paths, ignoring hive signals, their compound eyes wide and empty. Then came the first attack, silent, brutal, and without warning. A cleaner drone found the body of a caretaker, torn apart in a sleeping pod, his blood still warm, the attacker nowhere to be found. Panic was not common among the Zorak, but confusion began to spread like a whisper through the neural network. More incidents followed, always starting the same way. Strange silence, missed reports, then sudden bursts of violence. Victims were always found in pieces, and soon the bodies stopped staying dead. Hive cameras showed what none of them believed possible: once dead Zorak rising to their feet again, limbs twitching unnaturally, jaws snapping open and closed, as if remembering hunger. At first, their scientists thought it was a malfunction, a strange neural disorder, or maybe a bioweapon from a rival species. They sealed the area, sent in drones, but nothing returned. Biosensors inside the sealed hive showed movement, too much movement for a dead zone. The horror deepened when a rescue team was sent and only one came back, trembling, soaked in green Zorak blood, and screaming in broken patterns about shadows in the mind. The infected were no longer just mindless, they were fast, clever, and coordinated. They used tunnels, climbed walls, hunted in groups. The Zorak, who had no military force beyond peacekeeping drones, were not prepared for this. Their AI medical hubs analyzed the infected tissue and made a terrifying announcement. Unknown agent, neural decay detected, rapid mutation in host. The virus was evolving faster than they could study it, jumping from host to host, resisting all known treatments. The Zorak High Conclave held an emergency assembly and made a rare decision: seek help from another species. Many names were considered, but one stood out: humans. A species once infected by something similar, who had not only survived, but built stronger societies afterward. The name of their ancient pandemic was whispered among galactic scientists like a ghost story: the Terran necrovirus. It had destroyed cities, collapsed governments, and nearly ended their world, but somehow they had fought back and won. To the Zorak, this meant one thing: humans had faced death and turned it away. A message was prepared, marked high crisis, biological extinction threat, and sent across deep space channels toward Earth. As the plague spread deeper into Varelia Prime, devouring hives and overwhelming every firewall and medical defense, the Zorak could only wait and hope that humanity, the one species mad and bold enough to fight the dead, would answer before it was too late. When the emergency signal from Varelia Prime reached Earth, it didn't go unnoticed. The message carried heavy encryption and an ancient word that stirred fear even after decades of peace: necrovirus like Outbreak. The message was sent straight to the Interstellar Crisis Command, a branch of Earth's global defense system that only activated when the threat was bigger than a war, deeper than politics. Within minutes, alarms echoed through the orbital command station above Earth. Inside the glass and metal fortress, floating above the blue planet, Commander Alara Voss was already preparing for deployment. She had seen this kind of nightmare before, not in training, but in the real world, when she was only 19 and watched entire cities fall during the final days of Earth's own zombie plague. Her scars weren't just physical, they ran deeper into the choices she had made, the people she had lost, and the monsters that used to be her friends. Now, she was chosen to lead the most dangerous mission of her life. Her team was small but precise. Dr. Kyle, a cold but brilliant virologist who had studied every known mutation of the necrovirus. Sergeant Rico, a former Marine whose mechanical arm hummed softly when he moved, and who had once walked through a burning hospital filled with the undead to rescue a child, and Nyx, a silent AI engineer with a past no one knew, but whose drones never failed in battle. The mission was simple in words, but deadly in reality. Travel to Virelia Prime, identify the nature of the infection, stop the outbreak if possible, and evacuate if not. As their ship left Earth's atmosphere, heading into the black void of space, no one spoke much. Everyone knew what was waiting: a new world, a new version of the same old nightmare. When they arrived, the difference was immediate. The Zorak Thei were not like humans. They were tall, multi-limbed, and spoke with soft pulses of light and tone. They didn't understand fear the way humans did, but now their eyes flickered with a kind of desperate confusion. The welcoming party was small, thin, and silent. Hive walls were dark, lights dimmed to save energy. Infected zones were sealed, but the sound of distant screeching echoed through the tunnels like a warning. Ilara walked through those halls like she'd been there before, not physically, but in memory. The team got to work fast. Kyle began collecting samples, while Nyx deployed scanning drones into the deeper tunnels. Rico trained the Zorak peacekeepers in basic firearm handling, although their claws made it difficult to grip triggers. As they studied the infection, the truth became clear and horrifying. This was not the original necrovirus. It was something new, something faster and smarter. The infected were not only violent, they communicated. They moved in groups, avoided fire zones, and even set traps. Kale's tests revealed that the virus used both biological and digital signals, infecting not just the body, but the hive's neural network. That meant every infected could share sight, sound, and memory, creating a hive mind of the undead. Ilara realized they weren't fighting random sickness. They were fighting a system, and it was learning. Worse, hidden in the viral code were fragments of an old language, not Zorak, not human, but something older, something ancient and purposeful. When Kyle decrypted part of the genetic sequence, he found a horrifying label written inside the virus itself: Trial Protocol Alpha, Subject Species 17. That meant this outbreak wasn't natural. It was a test. Someone had created this virus to see how a species would respond to observe, judge, or perhaps exterminate. Ilara shared the findings with the Zorak High Conclave, and for the first time in centuries, the insect-like leaders broke protocol and showed fear. But fear wasn't new to humans. They had faced extinction once before and crawled back from the edge. Now, standing in the dark tunnels of a dying alien world, Ilara made a choice. They wouldn't just help, they would teach the Zorak Thei how to fight, how to survive, and how to resist the death that had come for them. But as they began training squads, securing zones, and uploading defensive systems, Ilara couldn't shake a growing feeling in her gut, a whisper that maybe this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, whoever made this virus was watching, waiting to see what humans would do next. And they were about to find out exactly what it meant to call humans for help. Inside the dark heart of Virelia Prime, the air had grown heavier, as if the planet itself knew something terrible was unfolding beneath its surface. The once silent hive tunnels were now filled with distant sounds of growls, echoing footsteps, and unnatural shrieks that bounced off the metal walls. The infection was no longer spreading in chaos. It was moving with purpose, with patterns. Captain Ilara Voss stood in the control room of the last functioning hive core, watching a red map show movement in the sealed sectors. It didn't look random anymore. It looked like strategy. The infected were circling strongholds, testing weak points, learning from failed attacks. The virus was adapting, evolving, becoming something no one had ever seen before. Ilara turned to Dr. Kyle, whose face had become more pale each day. His latest scans showed that the virus had begun rewriting Zorak-CI neural structures, not just killing the host, but converting it, blending biology with virus logic, turning victims into living nodes of a network. The infected were sharing memories, senses, even tactics, like they were part of a larger mind. It wasn't a horde, it was a hive, one that mirrored the original Zorak-CI structure, but twisted into something dark and brutal. Meanwhile, Nyx's drones uncovered something even worse. Deep in an abandoned hive chamber, they found a strange wall covered in organic growth, pulsing like a heartbeat. Attached to it were dozens of infected Zorak-CI alive, but frozen, serving as biological servers, feeding and processing information for the hive mind. The wall was not just alive, it was learning, and near it, etched into the floor in dried blood and strange metal symbols, was a single phrase: "Witness the harvest." Ilara knew now that this wasn't just survival. Some intelligence had designed this infection to mirror its host, to use the structure of the Zorak-CI against them, and possibly prepare for more than one world. They were looking at a weapon that could adapt to any species. With that realization, the humans doubled their efforts. Rico began training Zorak warriors in guerrilla tactics, small, mobile attacks, retreating before the infected could learn their moves. At first, the insectoids struggled. Their entire civilization was based on unity and order, not chaos and instinct. But slowly, they began to change. Watching the humans, they started thinking differently, more independently, more creatively. One young Zorak fighter named Velik even saved an entire tunnel group by breaking from orders and setting off an explosive trap without command, something no Zorak would have ever dared before. Ilara saw what was happening. The Zorak-CI were evolving not just physically, but mentally. They were learning how to fight like humans. But the price was high. Every day, more hive sectors fell. More civilians were lost. More fighters turned and had to be put down. And now, the infection had started to reach into the communication network, using broken neural pathways to send false messages, leading teams into ambushes. The virus wasn't just inside bodies anymore, it was inside the systems. Then came the worst moment yet. A Zorak team returning from a recon mission brought with them a captured infected. The creature had been restrained, its limbs bound in plasma wire, its mouth sealed. But even then, it glared at them with a strange intelligence. When Dr. Kyle ran a scan, he noticed something impossible. Brainwave activity in the infected was structured, almost conversational. With help from Nyx's AI interface, they decoded a pattern in the neural pulses. It wasn't random. It was speaking. And when they finally translated the signal, it sent chills through every human in the room. The message repeated over and over in a dead, broken voice: "You are seen. You are measured. You are next." Ilara stared at the screen in silence. This wasn't just a plague. It was a message. A test. And humanity, once a victim of their own undead past, had now stepped into something far more terrifying. Someone or something was out there, watching from the shadows, unleashing these trials on different species to see how they would react. Virelia Prime was not the first, and it might not be the last. But one thing was different this time. The humans were here, and Ilara knew this virus, no matter how smart or fast, had never faced the one force that didn't just fight to survive, but to win. As the infected began massing in greater numbers near the last hive core, preparing for what felt like a final assault, Ilara issued the command her people had once feared and respected: prepare for total resistance. The war for Virelia was no longer about saving a planet. It was about sending a message back to whoever had started this. Humanity had been tested before, and they were still standing. Now, they would teach this enemy what it meant to challenge the survivors of Earth. Far below the infected hives of Varelia Prime, deeper than even the Zorak knew existed, a forgotten chamber stirred with life not seen in centuries. Ancient machines blinked to life, scanning the movement above with cold precision. Unknown to the Zorak and the humans fighting on the surface, this buried place had once been a testing ground created by a long-vanished race, known only in myth as the Varniks, beings who were said to have mastered biology, technology, and war across stars before disappearing without a trace. Until now, no one believed they were real. But when Nyx followed a strange signal embedded in the infected neural pulses, it led to a sealed Zorak data vault deep in the ruins of an abandoned hive. Inside, they found a black cube, ancient, humming, and unlike anything seen before. As soon as it was connected to human systems, it began uploading encrypted data faster than any AI could track. At first, it seemed like a virus, but then the images started to appear. Holograms of experiments, planets infected, species monitored, all organized like a galactic laboratory. Each file showed a trial, a plague unleashed, a species studied, and a result logged. Humanity was listed under Trial 14, the Zorak under Trial 17. The files ended with a phrase in every language they decoded: adaptation is survival. Evolution through suffering. Only the worthy shall remain. Dr. Kale's voice trembled as he explained that this was not just an infection, it was part of a larger plan, a long-running project to force evolution through destruction. The Varniks hadn't vanished. They had retreated, watching from shadows, sending plagues to test which species were strong enough to endure and which would fall. The virus on Varelia was just another phase in this terrifying system. The infected, the hive mind, even the strange code patterns, they were not random mutations. They were designed tools, part of a controlled experiment by an ancient intelligence that viewed life not with empathy, but with curiosity and cold logic. As Alara listened to the recordings, she saw images of other civilizations, some wiped out, some broken and enslaved, none untouched. Earth's plague had been one of the few trials that had failed to destroy its host. That's why humanity had been left alone for so long. They had survived the test, but now they were back in the game. When this truth was shared with the Zorak High Conclave, their leaders went silent. Their entire belief system was built around peace, logic, and slow progress. Now, they saw themselves as nothing more than test subjects in a vast, heartless game. But Alara didn't let that silence last. She reminded them that humans had once believed they were alone and powerless too, until they fought back. The Varniks were watching, yes, but that also meant they could be seen. If the experiments could be tracked, then maybe they could be traced back to their source. Nyx began rebuilding the Black Cube's signal to find where it had last transmitted, and after hours of decoding, a location lit up a system outside known space, surrounded by dead stars and hidden behind false gravitational fields. It was called Seraphin's Halo, a place with no records, no maps, and no visitors. Alara made her decision immediately. If the virus came from there, that's where they would go. But before they could plan the journey, the infected launched their largest attack yet. Thousands of twisted Zorak bodies surged through the outer hives, their eyes glowing with shared fury. But this time, they were met with a new force. Zorak soldiers, trained in human strategy, using cover fire, explosives, and fast movement, met the infected head-on. Human-led units coordinated ambushes and traps. The battle raged for hours, with both sides suffering heavy losses. In the middle of the chaos, one of Nyx's drones captured footage that sent a chill through every human soldier. It showed a tall, armored figure walking through the infected ranks untouched. Its body was not entirely organic, not entirely machine. Its face was hidden by a mask with no eyes, but its hands were covered in living veins that pulsed with strange blue light. It didn't attack, didn't speak, it only observed. And when it turned, it looked directly into the drone's lens, as if it knew it was being watched. Elara knew instantly. This was not a product of the virus. It was one of the architects. The Varniks hadn't just returned, they were here, walking among their creations. And the message was clear. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something far larger than a war. It was a contest between creators and survivors. And humanity, tested once and hardened by fire, would no longer be just a subject in their lab. They would become the opponents. With the truth revealed and the shadow of the Varniks now looming over not just one world but many, Elara gathered her team for one final mission: take the fight beyond the infected tunnels of Virelia Prime and bring it straight to the ones who had started it all. The stars around Seraphin's halo were cold, dead and silent. But as the human Zorak Alliance ship broke through the cloaked gravity fields, they saw the truth behind the darkness: a massive structure floating like a forgotten god in space, shaped like a spiral of metal and bone, half living, half machine. This was no station. It was a construct, alive in ways no one could explain, and at its center pulsed the origin of the virus, protected by walls of shifting energy and creatures shaped by nightmares. Elara Voss stood at the command deck, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. Behind her stood Zorak Thei warriors in human-modified armor, their minds no longer bound to the old hive ways. They had learned independence, courage, and strategy. Dr. Kyle stood beside her, holding a canister containing the counter-virus, one developed after days of desperate research, using both Zorak DNA and Earth's old plague antibodies. Nyx had mapped a path inside the construct, while Rico prepared the demolition charges meant to destroy the entire core if all else failed. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was retribution, and perhaps the only way to ensure no other world would suffer what Earth and Virelia had endured. As their team breached the outer shell, they were met with silence. No alarms, no resistance, only strange whispers inside their helmets, a psychic pressure that grew stronger the deeper they moved. The walls were lined with failed experiments, preserved in glass, their eyes still open, their faces frozen in horror. They passed species no one recognized, some reptilian, some crystal-skinned, others that seemed part plant or metal. All had been tested. All had failed. Then, in the heart of the construct, they found the architects, not as many as expected, just 3. But their presence felt overwhelming, like standing before ancient storms in humanoid form. They spoke without mouths, their voices inside the team's minds, layered and echoing. They offered no greetings, only analysis. You resist evolution. You preserve weakness. You interrupt the trial. Elara stepped forward and replied with steady anger. You don't get to decide who survives. Not anymore. The architects warned them that destruction of the core would doom all infected species, including those still in early transformation. But Kyle had already seen the truth. The virus was no longer about evolution. It was about control, about rewriting life into a form they could manipulate. He activated the counter-virus, unleashing it into the core. Instantly, the structure began to shift and scream, not in sound, but in violent motion. The architects moved to stop them, but Rico charged forward, drawing their attention while Nyx's drones hacked into the control systems. Explosions tore through the inner layers as Zorak and human soldiers held the line, giving Kyle time to inject the virus directly into the system's neural core. The architects screamed, their bodies cracking like stone under stress, their minds flashing out across space like dying stars. One of them tried to merge with the hive systems, but was locked out by Nyx, who stayed behind to overload the reactor. Elara gave the final command to retreat, dragging Rico, wounded but alive, toward the ship. Nyx's last words echoed in the comms. For the record, humans improvise better. Moments later, the entire construct lit up from within and collapsed inward, consumed in white fire that broke through the false stars of the halo system. Silence returned. The war was over. Back on Varelia Prime, the infected collapsed, their minds disconnected, their bodies limp. The virus was dead, and the survivors began rebuilding, not as separate races, but as allies. The Zorak Theai rewrote their codes of unity, now including independence and personal growth. Statues were raised not of leaders, but of the fallen humans who had brought fire to the darkness. Ilara returned to Earth months later, not as a soldier, but as a symbol of what humanity had become, not just survivors, but protectors of other species. Dr. Kyle published his findings on the Varnix experiments, and interstellar councils across the galaxy passed new resolutions to prevent such manipulation from ever happening again. No one ever found another Varnix construct, but the memory of them lived on, not in fear, but in preparation. Humanity's legacy wasn't just in the virus they had beaten or the battles they had won. It was in the courage to fight the impossible, the strength to change others by example, and the fire to end a threat that had lasted for centuries. The galaxy would remember them not just as a species that answered a call for help, but as one that rewrote the rules of survival. In the deep silence of space, where ancient powers once judged life by how easily it could be broken, now echoed a new truth.